Now, in this week's edition of Let's Talk Some Star Wars, we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll that asked the question, how do you feel about the animated show Star Wars Resistance? I'll also be reading and responding to your comments, showing off the artwork that was sent in, though sadly there really wasn't all that much sent in this week, as well as highlighting a couple other YouTube channels towards the end of the video, and even directing you to a song that, though it's not Star Wars related exactly, I'd still be happy to share with you nonetheless. Alright, so let's just jump right into the results of the poll, where we'll see that only 2% of those who voted said that they had seen Resistance and thought it was good or great. 5% then said they'd seen it and thought it was about average. 8% of people then said they'd seen it and thought it was poor to terrible. Another 9% of people then said that they hadn't seen it but did want to, which left 77% of people to say that they hadn't seen it and don't want to. And when we break it down into two separate categories here, it means of those who have seen it, 13% said it was good, 33% said it was about average, and 54% said it was bad. And then of those who haven't seen it, 10% say they want to, and 90% say they don't. Anyway, let's now just move on to the comments, and as usual, a big thank you to everyone who votes and responds to the polls. I do greatly appreciate it, and I love bringing you these Let's Talk Some Star Wars videos, and I do hope you enjoy watching them. Anyway, as I always try and do here, I'll read comments from all sides, both positive and negative and everything in between, though as you can probably imagine there wasn't a flood of positive things said about Resistance, but there were certainly some and I will get to them. But to kick things off, well, as usual, we'll start with the top rated comment, which this week came to us from Isaac, who said, I don't want to watch it. It looks so cheap and terribly made. When they said they were going to use some anime art style for Resistance, I did not imagine this lazy looking art style, and it's full of slapstick humor I just can't stand. And, you know, long before we got our first glimpse of it, as you point out, they told us it was going to be anime inspired, and I think that got a lot of people excited, even those who might not be all that interested in the sequel trilogy time period. And then we got our first look at it, and pretty much all that hope died for a lot of people. The real problem for me though, visually, and a lot of people mentioned this in their comments as well, is it feels like a continuous downgrade in animation quality from Lucasfilm. And sure, Clone Wars started out feeling or looking a little blocky and stiff at times, but it still looked overall pretty good, and after a few seasons they mastered the style and it began to look incredible. Rebels then was a step down in animation quality from Clone Wars, but as I mentioned last week, in borrowing heavily from the designs of Ralph McQuarrie, it really made the show look and feel like Star Wars, even if it was a step down in quality from Clone Wars. Resistance then is yet another step down in quality, even from Rebels. And I don't know that there was anything about this show that really set it apart visually from anything else that you might find on any other cartoon or in any other cartoon or animated show out there these days. Okay, that then brings us to this comment from Wookie Talks, who asked, why does the animation style matter so much? It's the story that's important. And you're certainly not wrong about that. A good story can trump poor visuals pretty much any day, and usually it doesn't work the other way around. Usually, though not always, we don't care how pretty something is if there's no substance to it. That said, the problem with Resistance looking arguably not as good as the previous two shows, and for a moment let's just assume the story had been great, well, it's that for a lot of people, Star Wars is also a very visual experience. What it looks like is important to them, or may even be what draws them to it. But probably the biggest factor here is we've seen how good Lucasfilm can make these animated shows look. And so when they give us something that doesn't look anywhere near as good as what we got before, most people just feel they're being cheap and lazy. Even though, in defense of those who do the animation for these shows, well, they can only work with the budget they've been given. In other words, I don't blame the people behind the scenes making the show. I blame a lack of funds. Okay, moving on now, we have this comment from Leaf Green Sniper, who said, I never got to watch Resistance because my family dropped cable by then, but by the look of the trailers, it was like how Rebels was watered down Clone Wars, and this was watered down Rebels. Then the show released and the reviews didn't surprise me at all. It looked cheesy and goofy and was just broadcasting to even younger people than even in Rebels. I don't get how Disney misunderstood their fan base. Like with me, I grew up with the Clone Wars. I was 6 when it started and got into it as it went along. When it finished, I was 12, but in that time, I matured and understood the plots and themes as the show itself matured. The synergy was very nice. Then Rebels came out, and I was already too old for it. I watched the first 2 seasons, then a bit of the third before my cable was cut. But even then, when Rebels ended, I was about 14, and I could tell it was too kiddie. And then I see Resistance, and there's no wish to view it at all. I'd even say it took a bigger maturity jump from Rebels than Rebels did from Clone Wars. Not trying to sound pretentious, but I don't get how Disney doesn't try to nurture the older teen fans like me. I got hooked to the Clone Wars, but then the mature themes stopped with the Rebels. The argument also works with Rebels viewers. They're now in the dirt with Resistance, and the jump to The Mandalorian might be too big. And if not for me, then what about the people who were about 20 or older that grew up with the prequels when the Clone Wars started, and how do they feel? I mean, I'm 17 now, and I at least have The Mandalorian. I hope it's gritty, and I think it will be. And Clone Wars Season 7 to look forward to. But that Rebels Resistance gap was very trying. And if you're reading Thor, I'd like a 2003 Clone Wars poll, please make it happen. It's my favorite Star Wars content, period. Okay, first of all, I do want to get to, and I will get to what I promise, some 2003 Clone Wars content, including a poll at some point, I'd imagine. Right now, though, my focus is primarily on things like Episode 9, The Mandalorian, and Jedi Fallen Order, all the things that are coming out in the next couple months. That said, you bring up some great points here, and they were echoed by a lot of other comments as well, about how they're missing the mark with a very important age category, those being teenagers. Because, yes, I get that Resistance was pretty much meant to bring in the very young, but the same way Rebels left some teenage fans in limbo after the Clone Wars, those who had grown up with the Clone Wars and didn't want, shall we say, a reset or downgrade in maturity level, well, Resistance now did the same thing to those who had grown up with Rebels. It was another downgrade in maturity level after they had grown up with that show. And look, I certainly understand them wanting to bring in that really young age group, but I would think that's what shows like Forces of Destiny and Galaxy of Adventures would be for. Or if you want to do a show like Resistance for the really young fans, have another animated show for the older fans, or the teenage fans who grew up with a previous show and loved it, but don't want to watch something childish all over again. And maybe if Season 7 of The Clone Wars is successful on Disney+, which it almost certainly will be, it'll mean they'll give us more of that. But they'll give us more animation geared towards teenage and older crowd, and then the younger crowd can have shows like Resistance, and really nobody is going to care. That then brings us to this comment from For the Republic 1, who does a really good job summing up pretty much everything I've been saying here. Anyway, they said, I get how it seems shallow that I never gave it a chance, but being used to the quality of Clone Wars and to a lesser extent Rebels, the animation style for Resistance was a complete nope for me. It looked like a cutscene from a GameCube game. Also factor in not loving the new Ezra to begin with, leaves Resistance as a big, I'm not a kid, goodbye. Okay, let's now kind of shift to the other side of the argument and get to this comment from Plain, who said, I hope more people will give this show a chance. I loved every single episode. I see how lots of people don't like childishness in Star Wars, but honestly, I don't understand why. There's nothing bad in childishness. It's just more fun, and there's not that many silly jokes as people tend to think. Most of them come from Kaz and Niku, which is totally in character for them, and these moments are well balanced with more serious ones. I like the animation style with its light and saturated colors. Shots of the Colossus and ships were probably the best things. Characters and actions were good, but sometimes felt not smooth enough. Love attention to details. Characters are very good. Wish the Aces and Jace, guy who didn't want to work, were explored more, but we still got the second season for that. Also, Kaz is a lot like me, which is probably why I liked the show. The First Order, the Resistance conflict, and the New Republic involvement, or lack of involvement to be exact, are very strong sides of the plot. Spying, racing, fighting, shooting were not so good. Good enough, but still enjoyable. I recommend it to any Star Wars fan. Just give it a try. Forgot to compare it to the Clone Wars and Rebels. Resistance's first season was as good as Clone Wars Season 4 or Rebels Season 4, just in my humble opinion. Okay, first of all, I'm glad you and others do enjoy the show. I really am. I know I sound like a broken record, but I have no issue with people who enjoy something that I don't, and I never ever want to take someone's joy away. That's never the intent with my videos. Besides, enjoyment is completely subjective, and I can't tell people what they can and can't like. I can only tell you how I feel about something or how I see it, and as I always say, you can take or leave whatever I say as you will. That said, I would argue that Season 1 of Resistance is not as good as Season 4 of Rebels or Clone Wars. Both those shows had really hit their stride at that point, and after 4 seasons, those watching were probably really enjoying the characters and fully vested in them. So, objectively speaking here, it's hard to say that Resistance in just 1 season had built up as much as those other 2 shows had built up in 4. Again, you can certainly enjoy it more if you want, and you do say in your humble opinion. But really, the best way to compare these shows would be to match up their first seasons, and in my opinion here, Resistance was, unfortunately, because I did want to like it. Unfortunately, though, it just doesn't hold up to the other two. Okay, let's now quick fire off a few more comments before wrapping up this video, starting with this one from Carillion Cat, who said, "I'm gonna be honest, I unapologetically like Resistance. It's definitely made for a much younger audience than me. The comedy can feel very over the top, and the art style isn't as good as Clone Wars or Rebels, but I still like it. For me personally, the flaws are overshadowed by good things like the First Order's impact on the galaxy, or Oscar Isaac's great performance as Poe, or the thrilling race scenes. It's definitely far from perfect, but the show got me invested, and I'm really excited for Season 2. It's sad it has to end so soon." Then we have this comment from Nathan Wharton, who said, "I was surprised by how much I liked it. Just like with Rebels, which I also enjoyed, I had problems with a few main characters, but other than that, I legitimately enjoyed it. I'd rather watch it than The Last Jedi any day of the week. It was a fun show, and I'm looking forward to watching Season 2. Then we have this comment from Nick Vegas, who said, "I like the animation and some episodes are good, but the main character is just too goofy and slapstick for me to take seriously. Kids aren't dumb, and forcing them to pretend that a fully functional adult protagonist can make that many idiotic mistakes and still be alive is pretty insulting in my opinion." That then brings us to this comment from Noral, who said, "It's made for kids is no excuse. Children may get excited on a show whether it's good or bad, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve a good show or it's a waste of effort to create one." Next up we have this comment from Stevo Watches, who said, "The first trailer was good enough to make me decide it wasn't even worth watching, and I still to this day never will bother to watch it." Next up we have this comment from King Rex, who said, "A good cartoon is kid-friendly but not childish. Clone Wars did this pretty well in the first couple seasons, then mastered it in the later seasons. Rebels didn't necessarily feel childish, but it was definitely much more hesitant to be mature. Resistance is designed exclusively for 4-year-olds, from animation style to characters. In other words, childish to the core." Next then we have this comment from Darth Brooks, who said, "I honestly tried to give this show a shot and watched the first episodes, and just yuck. I'm honestly at the point because of The Last Jedi that I could care less about anything post Return of the Jedi. Hopefully The Mandalorian changes my mind." And finally here we have this comment from Lou Hidai, hopefully I said that right. Anyway, they said, "As a lifelong Star Wars fan, it never interested me, but hey, if it attracts new fans to Star Wars, then good for the show and the fans." And honestly, if Resistance has brought new, younger fans into the mix, I think that's awesome, though poor toy sales for the figures associated with the show, and being cancelled after just 2 seasons, might tend to say otherwise. But the real problem with the show, as I see it, is that it really alienated many of those who had fallen in love with previous Star Wars animated shows over the years. Yes, Rebels was a letdown to some after the Clone Wars, but Resistance, many said in these comments, was yet another step down or backwards, instead of a step forwards in pretty much any respect, or even at least a step sideways in being at least in line with the maturity level of Rebels. Though the bright side here is that, as I was talking about earlier, the failure of this show combined with the likely success of Season 7 of Clone Wars will hopefully change Lucasfilm's attack plan when it comes to animation, because there is a large crowd hungry for more quality animated shows, and I don't exaggerate when I say some of the best moments in all of Star Wars have happened in these shows, and there's no reason that can't happen again in the future. Okay, and finally here, let me point you in the direction of 2 other YouTube channels. But first, this week, and though again it's not Star Wars related, I had someone ask me if I could share a song they've done, so please go check out the song Dream by Daniel J, a link to which will be in the description below. And when you're done with that, check out Green Elation's video about why Star Wars is important, or check out the channel Star Wars News and Memes, links to both of which can be found in the description below. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to check out any of those recommendations, or to leave a comment below and tell me what you thought of this video, or anything I or someone else had to say in it, or go vote and comment on the latest poll, which should already be up if you're watching this now. And after these last few months of going over all the movies and shows we've already gotten, save the Clone Wars 2003, which I will get to, I'm going to do a few polls on some of the upcoming movies and shows, starting with your hopes and dreams and fears for The Mandalorian. Anyway, let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.